Welcome everyone to Almost Cancelled. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Stargirl Season 2, Episode 6. It's called Summer School Chapter 6. So, full spoilers for the episode. And, oh baby, what an episode. This is kind of... it's not surprising this season, because we had this last season. But, we had a couple episodes which were a bit lower key, but there's been a lot of fun stuff this season. There's been a lot of nice build. The one thing that last season really proved about this show, and kind of was a statement about how this show was going to operate, is that it's not afraid to be quiet for a little while, build things up, set up all the pieces on the chessboard, and then really pay things off in a big way that feels satisfying. It feels like it's not holding back, and because sometimes I feel like in TV shows, especially network TV shows, you can feel at the end destinations of certain plot threads, particularly when it's like a superhero show or an action show or something where you're expecting a big confrontation with combat, is that you end up feeling a little shortchanged, or they have to sort of keep it minimal just because it'll cost too much to do it in the way that you think. And maybe this show just balances its budget around the episodes so that it saves it for some big payoff episodes. But last season really showed that there were going to be special episodes, 2 or 3 maybe in a season, where you were going to get really impressive payoff fight scenes. It's not just fight scenes, because it's not just that there's a good fight scene in this episode that lasts like a long time, and it doesn't feel like it's shortchanged because they had to we're on TV, we have to make it smaller or pare it back. And I know some people say, well, it's still small, it's still just in a school. I mean, that's true, but it's still a fairly well choreographed fight scene amongst 2 groups of characters that lasts, I think the first part of it lasts continuously about 7 minutes, which in a show where without ads you're looking at 42 minutes, that is a long chunk of the episode. And even then, everything that happens after that and the aftermath of that fight, when I say that first part, I mean up until the Shade shows up, when it's just the kids having their group vs group fight. That is like a solid 7 minutes. And then the stuff after that, which is still very big and climactic and still feels like a payoff for everything that's been building for the past 5 episodes. This is, in a season with only 13 episodes, the fact that it still has that mid-season sort of peak kind of thing where it's going to come back down again and build up again to possibly the finale, possibly, maybe 2 more kind of climactic sections, whatever you want to call it. But this felt like a really rewarding episode. This felt like an episode that rewarded my time for caring and paying attention and being invested in the characters, and it gave me the big fight that utilized each character's unique abilities, and more importantly, utilized them in combination with whoever they were fighting's unique abilities. So seeing Fiddler versus Wildcat and how those 2 power sets match up, seeing Our Man versus I'll just say Artemis, seeing those power sets and the explosive hockey pucks. There's a couple of good moments with them. There's one where he says puck and it's kind of like he's dropping an F-bomb, which is funny. But there's one that's actually really quick before that I think is even better, where she slaps the hockey puck explosive onto the wall and then kicks him into the wall. I thought that was a really good moment. There's a lot of nice transitions. There's a moment where Wildcat is she's rolling and diving out the way from a sonic blast of the violin, and it cuts to Courtney rolling. So it's a really smooth transition. You've got your big sort of special, spectacular shot where Courtney goes up on the staff and flies around and helps the others who are all in perilous situations, and then that sort of gives them all the chance to win their individual fights. But even just from the get-go, the table's breaking. Wildcat does some really fun dives and sort of little feats of aren't necessarily that realistic, but the way she'll sort of jump up and hold onto the edge of the wall or the pillar and sort of almost be completely horizontal to dodge something, then sort of dive back down. And I know the suit's obviously helping a lot of this and explaining a lot of how this is possible, but it's just fun. And the fight scenes, proved to be really impressive last season. I think it was when we got to around, it was probably around the same point in the season, around 6 or 7 episodes in, we had the first big Courtney versus Cindy fight, and that was actually a really well done, just one-on-one fight. This was kind of leveling this up. This was, here's your almost, like, this shows a version of an Avengers team up of, like, we've got 2 teams, we're going to actually have them all interact. I did think it was a little bit funny when they first walked in that the heroes outnumbered the villains 4-3, but then I'm like, oh yeah, but Beth doesn't really fight, really. She's there with the goggles, and she goes and saves Mike, who's kidnapped at this point. And I know I skipped into the big thing, because I'll go back and talk about some of the setup and some of the stuff that I thought was interesting, but the big stuff in this episode is the confrontation. Cindy makes her move. Turns out she doesn't want Mike to be a member of her team. In fact, it's actually a really nice moment that pays off the anticipation of this in a sort of darkly ironic way, because she says he's a part of what she's planning, and he says he'll never join her team, and she laughs in his face and says, you would never be on the team. You're just the bait. And given that Mike's whole thing is feeling like he doesn't have a place in the JSA, and that he feels left out of even his family because, like, Pat's so involved in the JSA, the idea that the villains, who we all kind of assumed were going to, like, tempt him by offering him a place and making him feel like he is important, and that may be why he's tempted, to subvert that into, like, no, they're not going to give him a place. They think he's useless. He's just bait. Like, it's actually a really nice, dramatic little twist. And it's not something that the character will necessarily see it that way, in the same way that we do, but obviously it will motivate things. He wants to be more involved again. He basically makes his case at the end of the episode that he, like, needs to be able to defend himself. He felt helpless when Cindy came for him. He felt like he couldn't fight back. So he doesn't just want to help build Stripe again. He wants to have his own Stripe. He wants to have his own suit, so that he can actually defend himself. And given that they're in, dire straits now, maybe he should have his own self-defense system of some kind. And just last thing on Mike is I really liked, this is a weird joke, but when we first cut to him at the junkyard with Zeke, and he's saying, hey, maybe you should get a bike. No, rather than a car, get a motorbike. Get out there free in the open road. And Zeke turns to Mike and says, what are you, 22, 23? What? It was so random and so weird. And obviously Mike just sort of like, because Zeke, I'm 15. It was just such a funny, like, random line. Like, sometimes random lines like that can just kind of be annoying or feel like they're reaching for something or just desperate attempts at comedy. But for some reason, it just fits Zeke's character and demeanor that him just casually throwing out that he ballparks Mike's age as 22 or 23 is really funny. You could almost look at it as a sort of meta joke how a lot of the teenagers in CW shows do tend to be in their early 20s. But I believe the actor playing Mike is definitely younger than that. He's not, he still looks like a teenager. But hey, so good stuff. But so the big stuff going down. Cindy kidnaps him, tells Courtney to come get him. Of course, in conjunction with this, Pat has been attacked. Stripe has been destroyed. I've got some thoughts on that. I'll go back to that. But so it's the kids on their own. There's no Pat. Barb even says, "Go kick her ass." And it's the sort of thing where Barb, out of context, saying to Courtney, go be Stargirl and kick her ass when things are so threatening, would probably seem out of character. But I think the events beforehand, which is, like, not so much Pat being put in the hospital with a concussion, like that's the sort of thing that would maybe make her more reserved and careful and say, no, I don't want my daughter going to do stuff. Look, it just happened to my husband. But I think Mike being kidnapped and being in danger was the justification that the show needed to have Barb, like, give Courtney that kind of pep talk, that, like, yeah, go be a badass pep talk. It would have felt out of place otherwise, but because it was like, no, go save your brother. Like, you're the only one, like, your brother's in danger, she's threatened to kill him, you're the only one who can really save him. I have to accept that you're the best shot at doing this. So a bit cheesy, don't get me wrong, like, her saying go kick her ass is a bit cheesy, but, like, this is a bubblegum show. It's a bubblegum show with superhero characters that's not afraid to be that, and it's not always going to land when it goes full cheese, but I think it is in its DNA to have the ability to go full cheese, and I think that moment worked for me. So they have this fight. Which I've already mentioned most of the main beats, but really fun, really playful with all the various characters. It was fun seeing Artemis do some Sportsmaster-esque stuff, but instead of the bat, it's the ball, which is very lethal, and it's very cool, and like it works, and it works as a threatening weapon. It works for all the reasons why it should work. It's a little bit less unique because I think throwing a ball at someone is a lot more normal than the way he would like bounce a bat around. Bouncing a ball around is actually something that most people at least try to do in their life. Most people don't try to bounce bats off the ground and like do like fancy stuff with them. But it had vibes though. It still had vibes of her father. There was still a little bit of that Sportsmaster energy in there, even just the fact that she was wearing various sports things and she had the mask on. But that was fun stuff. So her properly being Artemis for the first time was good. But yeah, the big thing though, right? So we'll go back and do all the setup stuff in a minute. But the big thing is the Shade gets the call from Barb, who is hesitant to call him. He's like, why are you telling me about all this teenage bullshit? And then until she says, yeah, but Cindy's got the diamond. And he's like, oh, well, that is more interesting, isn't it? And he shows up just as Cindy's about to use the diamond because they've lost, right? We get a moment where Mike has been freed. He hits her with a toaster, which is this a callback to season 1? I feel like there was a joke with the toaster with Mike. There was a joke with Mike and the toaster in the kitchen. And I feel like him using the toaster as a weapon here was a reference to that. If I am making this up, then fair enough. But it made me laugh a little bit more because I for some reason, I connected him with the toaster. But he uses a toaster. He hits Cindy in the head with a toaster. And the Shade shows up. Is like, okay, playtime's over. You don't know what you're dealing with. And there's a bit of a, energy from the diamond. Eclipso's telling Cindy that, hey, like this, we need to do this, blah, blah, blah. Courtney comes in on the staff. And this is one of these things where maybe the Shade should have like communicated to Courtney that the last thing we want is this diamond to break and for Eclipso to get out. But the staff makes contact with the diamond, it shatters, and they build this up really well. Like I say, this episode felt like a great mid-season payoff to everything that's been building. And we've been building up to Eclipso. So that, cutting around town to Zeke and Barb and Beth's father, and they're looking up at this eclipse. And then we come back to the school, and standing there, and what I would say is a pretty awesome makeup and costume job as this version of Eclipso. I'm going to compare him to something that's going to sound like an insult, and it is in the sense that if it looked exactly like this, it would be an insult. But it was giving me like a better version vibe. But he did remind me a little bit of Ivan Ooze from the Power Rangers movie a little bit, and I think it was just the pointy chin and the sort of the head thing. Just there was a bit of a vibe. There was a bit of an Ivan Ooze vibe. But he has a presence. He's sinister. He feels like a big deal. He feels like a big bad, like in a traditional Buffy way. The hit television show Buffy the Vampire Slayer. They always had a big bad every season, and he feels like this season's big bad. And it felt like this is their first, it's their first true encounter with him. But it really felt that. And within minutes, he kills Isaac, whose name I finally learned this episode because of the opening scene. I'm actually kind of glad he's dead because his acting when he actually has to deliver lines isn't that great. So honestly, wise choice. Eclipso also then I wouldn't say kills Cindy. I think we'll see Cindy again, but he does sort of like send her somewhere by using a part of the diamond. She gets like pulled into a pool, and Courtney does try and save her. And I thought it was very effective having Cindy cry out for help. Please don't let him take me. Please don't let it take me. Please don't let go. I thought was very effective because of how much of a badass she's trying to be. She's trying to be this super cool bitch. She's trying to, be this all season. And in this moment, she's begging for Courtney to save her. I think that was kind of powerful. It kind of, worked really well. It paid off in everything that her character's been. And when I say it pays off, what I mean is it gives you some sympathy for her so that she's potentially a more interesting character when she pops back up. But it's also uh, a good payoff because it sells Eclipso. It sells us on the idea of how evil and much worse and how bad Eclipso is. It goes back to that difference from before. There's a difference between bad and evil. And that's brought up again in this episode with Isaac. Yolanda says it again at the end. But, he ingests Isaac. They theorize later that he ingests evil people, and that's when Yolanda says, no, he wasn't evil. He was just a kid. He was just a kid who was troubled and was still trying to figure things out, had temper issues, whatever, but he wasn't evil. And her saying that means something because Isaac's mean to her at the start. That's the opening scene, which I liked a lot, actually. I liked it just being like the various members going to torment the other members of the team. And he shows up at the diner and he's mean to her. So her saying this means a bit more because she's the one who had a direct kind of conflict with him earlier in the episode. She fought him in the fight, which was fun, her dodging all the soundwave blasts. But then her showing this sympathy, it does a couple of things. It has a bit more weight because she has this guilt over killing a villain. So her saying, no, he didn't deserve this, he was not evil, he should not have died, has a bit more weight because she has actually taken a villain's life and knows, and maybe has a bit more gravitas to that because she knows how that feels and has a bit more of a comprehension of it. So again, nice story building that's paying off on the character's previous experience. It feels like everything that happened in the past matters, which is good. And not enough TV shows accomplish that. So good. I sound really condescending here, but good. But yeah, so he ingests Isaac. Super dark moment. Again, so that's the idea that he corrupts people. He corrupts them and then feeds off them once they're corrupted. And that's what he's done with Isaac. And Isaac has been the most moody one. He's been the one who's been the most villainous. Earlier on in the episode, he was the one who seemed to be willing to kill. He was going to kill Pat. Which I guess I'll go back to this scene now because I really want to talk about this. I think one of the most heartwarming moments in this episode is Artemis stopping Isaac from killing Pat and saying, he's my dad's friend. We're here for the robot. Holy shit. So first of all, you're giving her like her platform for redemption because she wasn't willing to take a life. At least not yet. And even if consciously she thought she was ready to kill other people because she's a bad guy now, she hadn't, and she wasn't ready to cross that line in the moment. That makes it a really easy platform to start our path to redemption, right? It makes us like her a bit more because we like Pat. And most of us, I think, also love Pat's relationship with her father. So, great stuff. But even the idea that she like considers him her dad's friend, whether that's through just what she's seen, like we have, and she's not seen everything we have, she's not seen all the private conversations, but whether that's from just ancillary like background stuff she's witnessed, or whether that's because her dad, and this is the even sweeter version, has actually referred to him as his friend or indicated in conversation to her that he likes Pat, is actually really nice. And again, it makes it really exciting to have those characters be around next season. So fair play and full points for that. Really great stuff. So she runs away. So she doesn't get killed in this scene. She runs away. The team try to fight Eclipso, as does the Shade. And the Shade, like, even though he's super villainous sounding all the time, and even though he's super, and he's sort of become maybe a lawful evil because or lawful bad, maybe is a better way of putting it, but he really does genuinely seem to want to fight Eclipso here in this moment. And he doesn't get killed. He gets sort of bitch slapped, and he sort of turns into Shadow again. He turns into the smoke monster, if you will. And we see him actually pop back up, and it's like he can't actually stay physical, or he can't keep his body because he's in pain and he's trying to like keep his corporeal form, and then he turns back into the Shadow again. I think that's very interesting, and maybe it's definitely a sign that we're going to see more of him. He's not gone for good. Maybe he has to recuperate in the Shadow Realm for some time or something. That could be some interesting beats to play. But his interaction with everyone, now that he's directly interacting with the kids in Eclipso, instantly made him more of an engaging character, and he was already a fun character, but I think this was already a little bit more potent, a little bit more vibrant, you know. So you've got that. You know, our man gets bitch slapped. Courtney, of course, maybe the most direct consequence of this fight is that the staff gets depowered, seemingly, at least for now. It does seem to affect Eclipso, but then he just kind of sucks the life out of it, and now it won't light up, it won't turn on. So obviously there's going to have to be some payoff for that. It does mean that Courtney's also neutralized for some time as far as her Stargirl fighting. I mean, she has some combat skills, but you know what I mean, like her actual like flying around and like blasts of energy and you know all that other stuff. Maybe this is what leads to the cosmic belt. Maybe if the Starman who's trying to find Pat is real and it's really Starman, then maybe this is how she gets the belt, and the belt is there, and then she'll get the staff working again later, and she'll have the full Stargirl arsenal, if you will. But all good stuff. The way, I mean, everything about Eclipso's vibe, like I said, the makeup looks great, the costume looks good. The way, I think the actor, he's like theatrical enough, but he's not quite as like, not quite as theatrical in the same way the Shade is. He's a bit more monstrous, and the way he kind of like darts out of there, almost like an animal. It's probably the sort of thing where if we saw it for a second more, it might have looked stupid, because I can't imagine the effect of that is probably that great, but it was quick enough that it actually looked quite good in the moment. And I'm very interested in how we're going to deal with this character being around now. And he turns into the little boy again at the end, and is walking down the main street, and it's like he is among us, and no one knows who he is, and he's around. There's a lot of potential here for that. They don't quite know exactly what he's going to be up to, but that's felt like a really neat conclusion to Cindy's like arc of building this team. It feels like we're into like the real story of the season now with Eclipso, which it should always feel that way, I think, with a season, right? If you're going to have this midpoint of a season where it shakes things up halfway through, it should always feel like the second half is the half that's not how do I say the important half? That feels disingenuous. It should always feel like the second half is the main point. Like the first half should exist to make the second half feel special. They should both work in their own rights, don't get me wrong, but like if you're going to have this sort of two half kind of structure to your season, which this effectively is, this is episode 6 of 13, so I'm super pumped. They made me really hyped for Eclipso, and I was into Eclipso stuff before, but I think the character himself of Eclipso was just this voice before. Yeah, the concept was cool, but I wasn't necessarily hyped for him. But then seeing him in this episode, him taking up like minutes, like, you know, again, they could have shown him for a second and then he could have ran away before he did anything, but he did so much to the characters around him and his first interaction with them that it really sold him. Again, it didn't feel like they shortchanged you on the payoff to the build from the last 5 episodes. And that is like, it's super rewarding as a viewer, and it makes you trust the writers, it makes you trust the show, that it's worth investing in. You know, like I'm very confident there's going to be a lot of great payoff in the finale again, and maybe in an episode before then, sort of in between as well. But and that's not to say that the build up isn't good, because there's been some great build up. The episode with Thunderbolt I thought was wonderful, and like there's been great episodes this season. I think last episode was the weakest one probably, and the one that I said I feel like a bit, you know, I could feel the transitional gears going, and there were some great moments, but it definitely wasn't as fulfilling as an episode. This was so fulfilling as an episode, and now that we're at this point where the first 6 episodes are out, if you binge the first 6, I think this first 6 episodes of the season are super satisfying and fulfilling. Like you get to this episode 6, and I think you feel like you've had a full meal. You could easily, I think you could recommend to someone right now that you should watch, if you're assuming you've seen season 1, you could say, yeah, if you're waiting to the end of the season because you like to binge, that's cool. But if you want to do it in 2 halves, you could binge the first 6 and to have a break. Like you could treat this as a mid-season break point and come back in a few months. Well, it's not even a few, it's like 2 months. Like, come back in 2 months and you can binge the rest. Like, it would work as a 2-part experience, I think. Based on that's how I think fulfilling this episode is. It might be the best episode of the show so far. And part of the reason why serialized shows often have their best episode later on if they're good. Obviously, there's a lot of like cable shows that tend to peak in season one and then just get weaker after that, which is a shame. But the reason why serialized shows should and often have their best episodes later in the run and maybe keep topping themselves is because the more you have a history and the more you have the long form storytelling where the characters have changed and evolved and have learned from their experiences. It's like I was saying with like Yolanda having that line about Isaac not deserving to die, Mike being laughed at for thinking he would be wanted on the villains team. Those things have more meaning because of the story that's built up to this point, and those are more direct because they've been direct plot points that are obviously very intentionally feeding into these moments. But there's also like an extra layer underneath that where it's just everything counts and everything matters, where like any reference to Courtney referring to Pat as her dad, for example, will always hit. It will always feel special. It will always be an important moment. And again, that's like I feel like trying to think of examples almost takes away from the point of what I'm trying to say, because it's not about specific moments you can pinpoint. It's more about just you care more about these characters the longer this goes on. As long as they're well written and as long as they don't betray how they're supposed to feel and that their growth feels genuine and you're on board with their journey, then it naturally and should hit even harder the further it goes until the writing starts to falter. And that's the balancing act and the knowing when to sort of wrap it up and like all the other things that go with TV writing. But this was an example halfway through a second season that if I think there was always a slight concern that because it was becoming a full CW show with season 2 that it was going to lose something. And I think I never really thought it had in the first 5 episodes. I think this episode is my definitive like no, it didn't lose a damn thing. This is still Stargirl and it's still topping itself, and that's fantastic news. So I'm into it. I'm absolutely into this episode. I think everything with Eclipso's entrance was great. I have no faults with that at all. I did go back and kind of talk about some of the scenes earlier anyway. Just more on the Pat attack, the Pat attack scene. Obviously I love the ending, like I mentioned with Artemis, but even Artemis like punching the shit out of him and him like trying to avoid hitting a child for as long as possible, and he does eventually like try to take a swing after a funny line where he says, "Are any kids in this town normal?" But he does miss and immediately gets his ass kicked. Still, like he doesn't actually do anything. He's still hopeless in this moment. And it also gave these two teenage villains a bit of bite that they were able to do this to Pat. And I know he doesn't have superpowers or anything, but they're still like beating up one of our main adult characters, so it still has a bit of weight to it. Obviously I didn't really mention how they found out about Cindy. I mean, Rick actually kind of just guesses it as well separately, but you have the painting, of course, from the art gallery classroom. Cameron has one little scene here where he shows up and has this gravelly voice where he tries to be all serious. So yeah, just reminding us that he's around. Obviously he had the big ending last episode, so that's bubbling over for now. Yeah, is there anything else on the first? I mean, I guess the one thing I've not really talked about is Beth's big conversation with her father about their pending divorce. To be nice, I do think this is maybe the most genuine scene of this yet, in that her father, the way he responds and just kind of, okay, there wasn't really anything new per se, which is a problem with the scene. On top of it, the not really caring about her parents' divorce. It doesn't feel like it's a big a deal. I'm saying that kids shouldn't care when their parents get divorced or anything. I'm just saying that in the scheme of the show and what the other kids have been through, like the parents getting divorced doesn't seem like that big a deal. It's a more normal thing that a lot of people have to go through, and it sucks for most, but you deal with it, whatever. But I did think the scene was better written, I guess, than maybe some of the other ones. Just not in a major way, but just in that him sitting down saying, "I promise not to talk to you about this without your mother," and kind of being this like loving parent, but also kind of diplomatic with the idea of like not like going behind his wife's back or anything to be the good parent and have the good talk or anything like that. But I don't know, it felt a bit more genuine. The guy's a solid actor in the scene as well, which I think helps a lot. I think maybe what made it feel just a little bit better than maybe previous scenes is that up until now, it felt kind of like Beth's parents were trying to avoid her all the time because she's annoying and she's always like wanting to do stuff with them and be involved in their lives. And that was kind of a weird vibe. And you could argue that's partially because they were sort of on this rocky path where they knew they were heading down to divorce. But I think this scene kind of like gave us like, no, he does love his daughter, and there is kind of a genuine concern for her here. He definitely looks like worried about how she feels about everything that's going on. Not only because of the big binder with all the like second honeymoon ideas or anything, but just seeing how she's reacting, and she's clinging constantly to new hopes of like saving the marriage, and he knows that that's not going to happen. So like there's just a bit more of a genuine feeling to this scene, I guess. But not, by the way, oversell it either, because it was still probably my least favorite scene of the episode. So take that for whatever it's worth. But yeah. Artemis taking her head off with the baseball afterward, or almost taking her head off with the baseball afterwards, though, was fun enough. I think like the actual interaction and dialogue of the scenes at the start with Artemis confronting Beth and Isaac confronting Yolanda. I think I love the concept of them both confronting members of the team and sort of like getting the gears going in the big confrontation. More than I necessarily like the actual dialogue and interactions themselves. But they served their purpose, and it made me kind of hyped that the ball was rolling, as it were, and it did. Like, I wasn't even necessarily sure at that point that we were going to have the big fight, the first big team-on-team fight this episode, but we did, and it was kind of glorious. The episode ramped up really. The stakes rose. Once Pat was put in a hospital bed, and Mike was kidnapped, it was like, oh shit, we're having some conflict. We're having some proper culmination this episode, and it delivered. I think if you check the runtime, the fight in the high school starts like, but it starts before the halfway point of the episode. More than half the episode is still left when they step into that high school. So it really feels like they gave all of that payoff time to breathe and let the fighting be exciting and fun and have highs and lows and impressive little feats of action. And then all of the Eclipso entrance, it had all the weight and the gravitas and the theatricality that you'd want of it. And he feels like he has menace. He feels like he has a bit of pulp, because this show is pulp. It definitely is, and that comic book vibe. But he instantly feels like a much more interesting force of evil compared to Icicle last season, and that's cool. And you want that. You want to up your ante for season 2. And we're left with all the characters being like, well, what the hell do we do now that he's out there in the world? How do we fight this guy? He completely destroyed us. So, really fun stuff. And yeah, like multiple characters. Well, at least one character died, and Cindy, is going to be presumed dead for a while at least. Shade is maybe going to be presumed dead or missing for a while. Like, it really feels like it did a number. He did a number on everyone. So, good stuff. Good stuff. I am raving about this episode because it was a super exhilarating, fun time. And I think if you enjoy this show and you give a crap at all about anything that's going on, it's these payoff episodes that really make it all sing. And when I talk about how serialized shows, like, in theory, this payoff is better than payoffs in season 1 because we just care more about everything that's going on. Because, we got impressed with those payoffs in season 1, so we became more invested. And then they did some more character work with the characters, we care more about the characters, so therefore this payoff is even more satisfying than the payoff before, assuming that the writing's up to scratch and it's not dwindling on that front. So, because of that, this payoff is enhanced because they already won me over last season, and and so the hopeful snowballing continues. So, very good stuff. I really enjoyed this episode. It's definitely the best episode of the season, I think, and there's a good argument for it being the best episode of the show so far, and I think I would probably say the best fight sequence of the show so far, which is actually saying something on this show. It has been impressive with its fight sequences. Having such a long extended fight sequence is a big ask for a show like this. I'm not saying I've never seen a scene go that long, like a fight sequence in a network show, but it definitely is rare. It doesn't happen often, so credit where credit is due. But there you go. That's Stargirl, episode 6, season 2. Let me know what you thought of this one in the comments below. Like and subscribe, all that stuff. Get me on the Twitters at... Well, you get me on the Twitters at Wibble89, but you get Mailed Fuzz updates on at mailed_fuzz for channel updates. Check out Mail Fuzz Movies for the movie channel where the horror, sci-fi, and sometimes other movies get reviewed on our various movie podcasts. You can, of course, support us by hitting the like button, subscribing, dinging the bell for notifications. All those things do help and are completely free to do, so please do hit the buttons. If you want to go a little bit further and support us financially, you can head over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and support us for as little as $1 per month and help keep all the content coming and get some bonuses for your troubles. But otherwise, that is me, so thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?